NTD Newsroom, I'm Don Ma. President Trump scoring a major legal victory. A court in New York tossing out his $454 million penalty in the business fraud case. President Trump will be patrolling the streets of D.C. tonight. What he says about the job the National Guard is doing. D.C. residents are reacting to Trump's takeover of the police department and deployment of federal law enforcement. What are they saying? Ukraine keeps pushing for a meeting with Russia, calling on the U.S. to possibly ramp up pressure on Moscow. How Vice President J.D. Vance responds. The Democratic Party is facing a voter registration crisis, according to a new report. What does this mean going into the midterms? Experts weigh in. Hurricane Erin staying offshore, but the danger is right here on our beaches. Deadly rip current, towering waves, and dozens of rescues in North Carolina. The warning tonight, stay out of the water.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us tonight. Vice President J.D. Vance is in Georgia today. He's with EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, visiting an industrial refrigeration manufacturing facility in Peachtree City. Vice President Vance is speaking about President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill and the historic tax cuts it delivered to the working class. Let's take a look at that.
And I know what the president ran on, and what the president cares about is building things right here in the United States of America. It's another reason why I'm proud to be at Alta today. Because for a generation in this country, we had American presidents and American political leaders, and let's be honest, folks, it wasn't just Democrats, it was Democrats and Republicans who would ship our jobs overseas, close our factory doors, and do not a damn thing for the American worker. So how nice is it in Washington, D.C. to have a government that is going to protect your jobs, that's going to fight for this facility and say, very simply, if you're building it here, if you're making it here, if you're producing it here, we are going to give you, and already have given you, a big fat tax cut. That's a good thing. But if you make it overseas, if you try to do something with a foreign worker as opposed to an American worker, if you try to ship our great American jobs and great American factories overseas, then you are going to pay a big fat tariff before you bring that crap back into the United States of America. And that's what President Trump's economic policies are all about, my friends. It's the carrot and the stick. We want to make it easier to build in America. We want to make it harder to build overseas. We want to make it easier to rely on our great American workers because we got a lot of them. American businesses ought to employ American workers. And we want to make it harder to employ foreigners to take those jobs from the Americans who deserve them. And most importantly, if you're working hard every single day right here in the United States, or if you're building a business right here in the United States, you ought to have a tax code that rewards you instead of punishes you, and that's what happened when we passed the Working Families Tax Cut just a couple of months ago, and of course, Brian Jack was a critical part of that, so you should be proud of your congressman. Now, what does this law mean for you? What this law means for you is that your take-home pay is going to go up over $10,000 over the next few years. What that means is that if you're working an hour of overtime, the federal government is going to keep its money the hell out of your pocket. Because if you're working hard, the government ought to leave you alone. Ain't that the truth? Do we have any single moms out there? Any single dads? Any people who work hard every single day? I had a single mom. And for a time, my mom worked at a restaurant. She waited tables, like a lot of folks out there. And you know what we did in this new law? We said that if you're working hard and you're making your income via tips, we are not going to tax tips anymore because we want to give everybody out there that's working hard for those tips a little bit of relief. And that's what the working families tax cut did. No matter where you are in this country, if you're working hard and play by the rules, you ought to have a government that stands up for you instead of fights against you. That's why we increased the child tax credit in the working families tax cut. That's why we eliminated taxes on overtime and on tips. And that's why we had the biggest tax cut for families that this country has ever seen, because we believe that you ought to keep more of your hard-earned money, and we believe that if you're busting your rear end every single day, the government ought to make it easier for you and not harder for you, and that's why we fought for that legislation. Now, I am just a vice president. I'm just a lowly politician, but I'm going to try my hand at prophecy today, ladies and gentlemen, because I see the future of the state of Georgia, and in about a year, you are not going to be able to turn on the television without Senator John Ossoff pretending that he supported the working families tax cut when in reality he voted against it. And I saw a TV clip of him today. You know why he said he voted against no taxes on overtimes? You know why he said he voted against no taxes on tips? You know why he said that he voted to raise your taxes by the biggest amount in a generation in this country? Because he's allegedly worried about people getting kicked off their health care. Well, you know what? The President of the United States made a promise, a sacred promise, that the only people who are going to lose access to health care are illegal aliens who shouldn't be in this country to begin with. Because I happen to believe that Medicaid belongs to American workers and American families. I happen to believe that when you are struggling in this country, we're generous people, and we want to help you. But we want to help the people who have the legal right to be in the United States of America. So it's not about kicking people off of health care. It's about kicking illegal aliens the hell out of this country so that we can preserve health care for the American families who need it. And that's what the Democrats never talk about. That's what they'll never tell you. They'll say, well, Republicans want to do this to health care. They want to do that. They want to do all these terrible things. When in reality, if you look at what the Democrats have done, what they've tried to do is to allow millions and millions of illegal aliens into this country, to give them benefits that ought go by right to American citizens, and then to attack Republicans when we dare to stand up for the American citizens who have the right to be here. So when you watch those TV commercials in a year, and John Ossoff, I tell you, he's going to pretend to be a reasonable moderate. He's actually going to run TV advertisements, I promise you, because I ran against a guy like this in the state of Ohio, where he says that he supported President Trump's agenda. But in reality, while John Ossoff pretends to be a moderate when he comes to Atlanta, he is a far-left liberal in Washington, D.C., and that's the only place that it actually counts if you're a United States senator. So why don't we ask John Ossoff, why did you vote to raise taxes? Why did you vote to keep illegal aliens on Medicaid? Why did you vote to bankrupt Medicare? Why did you vote to make sure that people who work overtime and earn their income from tips pay as much to the federal government as possible? And the simple answer is because John Ossoff, whatever he pretends to be in his television commercials, he doesn't give a damn about the 3rd District, and he doesn't give a damn about the people of Georgia, but we do, and we're going to fight for you every single day.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance speaking in Peachtree, Georgia, touting the government's efforts to increase take-home pay for Americans, highlighting no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and saying that the government should stand with the hardworking American family rather than going up against them. All right, President Trump will be patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C. tonight. Here's what he said on the Todd Starnes show.
I'm going to be going out tonight, I think, with the police, and with the military, of course. We're going to do a job. The National Guard is great. They've done a fantastic job.
Trump's announcement comes as his public safety emergency declaration in D.C. enters week 2. The president has touted the achievement of the National Guard and the D.C. police in reducing violent crime. The White House announced today that officers have made 550 arrests in D.C. in just a week. Carjackings are down 83%, robberies are down 46%, car thefts are down 21%, and overall violent crime is down 22%. And breaking news, a big win for President Trump. An appeals court is tossing out his $454 million civil penalty from last year in his business fraud case. The New York Appellate Court finds the fine to be excessive and at odds with the Eighth Amendment. This is the case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. A New York judge last year found that Trump and his company committed business fraud by inflating their value. The president has called the case politically motivated. Both sides can still challenge today's ruling to the state's highest court, the New York Court of Appeals. And Texas is moving closer to signing a new controversial new congressional map into law. Earlier, the Senate Districting Committee approved a revised bill, while other states are taking similar steps. Florida is the latest to jump into the mix. The governor is asking for the Federal Census Bureau to give the state one more seat based on population changes. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the report.
Texas state senators are teed up for a vote later this evening to approve a new congressional map, one that was approved by the House just yesterday. It's the last step before the governor signs it into law. With this new Texas map, it endangers 5 sitting congressional Democrats, meaning that during the midterms, it will make it easier for Republicans to win those 5 seats. Here's how the state Democrats were responding after last night's vote.
That our best shot is in the courts. This part of the fight is over, but it is merely the first chapter.
Trump responded to the news last evening, posting, "On our way to 5 more congressional seats and saving your rights, your freedoms, and your country itself. Texas never lets us down. Florida, Indiana, and others are looking to do the same." The president is also calling for the states to stop mail-in voting, describing it as a total fraud that has no bounds. The redrawn districts are controversial and have sparked national debate. Democratic governors of New York and California, Kathy Hochul and Gavin Newsom, offered a brief warning to Texas after they passed the map last evening, writing comments like "It's on" and "Game on, Texas." California is working in parallel to Texas. They're expected to vote on their new map that favors Democrats later today, and the governor is expected to sign it shortly afterward. California Democrats say that Texas forced their hand, while Republicans have filed a lawsuit.
None of us want to be in this situation, but our hand is being forced, and we will not unilaterally disarm. That is why we are here, and we are doing this in the most transparent way possible.
I think we're going to defeat this. Unfortunately, we had this lawsuit that we lost today. We're going to continue to fight this here in the legislature, at the ballot box, and continue to tell other states, do the right thing, uphold democracy.
And now we see Florida getting involved. Governor DeSantis says that their population in the state was undercounted in the 2020 census.
Maybe get a tweak to the census, Supreme Court rule on racial gerrymandering, and then just accounting for the reality that Florida has had a big population shift.
He's asking the Federal Census Bureau to reallocate seats based on new data. He's hoping to secure at least 1 more seat for Florida, but 1 seat gained in the red state of Florida is 1 seat lost from another state. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss Texas House passing the GOP redistricting map is Nathan Worcester, national political reporter with Epoch Times. Good to see you, Nathan, and good afternoon. So first of all, can you give us the latest on this and which parts of Texas are most affected by these new maps?
Well, the latest is that a state Senate panel just advanced the measure, which sets up a vote later tonight. Should be at 9 p.m. Eastern or so, when the Texas State Senate is able to fully, in all likelihood, pass this new set of maps, and then it would go to Governor Greg Abbott for signature.
So how are Democrats responding? What happens next? Are Democrats bringing legal challenges?
Well, the big story was, of course, a number of Democrats going AWOL in past weeks to avoid having to vote on this. They did return, and they did so under police escort. So you actually had a member of the Texas legislature, Nicole Collier, a Democrat, who, as an act of protest, slept on the House floor. And she has already begun the process of suing over those police escorts. So far, we're also seeing moves from a group that includes the Democrats' nonprofit arm challenging redistricting, plus some other advocacy groups preparing to advance legal challenges. So the short answer is yes, this is teeing up a series of litigatory battles, as one might expect with pretty much anything involving redistricting, especially mid-decade redistricting.
Nathan, how big of a deal is this for Republicans or Democrats in Texas? And what about the change in the balance of power in Congress?
Well, I think it's important to put this in context. We're coming up on a midterm election, and for the party in power, which in this case would be the Republicans, there's always a fear of the changeover, at least in one chamber. In this case, the Republicans are looking at a pretty strong map in the Senate. They could even grow their power, but that very narrow majority, that is something they could be poised to lose. So we see Texas setting up what could be 5 seats. In parallel to that, we're seeing California now at the point where the legislature is poised to vote on their map, which might flip 5 seats as well. President Barack Obama has endorsed this move. In California, we can speak about this more. It's a little more complicated because it would ultimately have to be approved through a citizen referendum in November. But we're seeing this tit for tat between blue and red states, not just Texas and California, as was discussed a few minutes ago. We also have Florida, there's Ohio, Missouri, and Indiana in the picture as well.
Can you go a bit more into detail about those other states that are doing similar moves?
Yes, so in Ohio, a very important wrinkle is that this has to happen. You know, it's fairly complicated, but basically they're set up under their law to necessarily redistrict or assess the composition of their map. And there could be a process whereby we have a more long-term map from Ohio, but most likely what's going to happen is we have another map that lasts several years. In Indiana, there has been some energy coming, I think, both from the Trump administration and then from the Indiana delegation in Congress, but there has also been some pushback. And in Missouri, the Governor Kehoe has said that this could happen, and a Republican official has mentioned a map that is apparently circulating in Washington. She said she hasn't seen it, but certainly looks like we're approaching fairly similar dynamics playing out in these other states ahead of the midterm elections.
And Nathan, I also wanted to talk to you about D.C. and Trump's efforts there. And earlier we reported that he's going to patrol the streets tonight with the National Guard. So let's talk about that. How are locals reacting to President Trump's takeover of the city's police?
Yes, Trump patrolling with the National Guard. That's symbolism similar to that which we saw at Union Station when Vice President J.D. Vance, White House advisor Stephen Miller, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they went down there. And of course, as one might expect in a place like D.C., they were greeted by protesters. That is important to keep in mind. At least some polling suggests that many D.C. residents, it's a very blue city, many are generally concerned about the Trump administration's takeover. And so when I and my colleague Stacey Robinson, we actually went out on the streets and spoke to business owners and employees, we heard a mixed reaction. We certainly heard people who were concerned about how this could play out, but others acknowledged the scope of crime in the city. And in fact, there were some folks who somewhat grudgingly said, well, it does seem as though, for example, in Navy Yard, things are safer than they were just a few weeks ago.
Can you go a bit deeper into that as well? I want to know how crime has evolved over the years, perhaps in the eyes of long-term residents in D.C.
Yes, this is a very important topic because I think there's a lot of selective information circulated. The big story in D.C., as in so many other cities, we saw extremely high rates of crime, violent crimes like homicides, rape, assault in the 1980s and 1990s. And there was a downward trend that happened about 25 years ago. You saw very low levels of murder, for example, in the late 2000s. And then in the 2010s, and then especially after the pandemic, we saw another increase. Generally speaking, when you look at the individual crimes, it doesn't approach the absolute peaks that we saw many decades ago, but it was still an increase. There appears to be a decrease, but of course, those numbers in D.C. are now disputed, at least in part. For long-term residents, for example, the owner of a convenience store in one somewhat dangerous neighborhood, she really stressed just how scary it was back in the 1990s. But even to this day, she's quite concerned about, for example, people who are suspicious in her eyes coming into the store, possibly targeting her. You get the sense that despite D.C. perhaps being better than it was in the 1990s, things are still a little bit edgy and perhaps even worse than they were 15 years ago or so.
Nathan, just a couple more things. And after you've been talking to locals, what do they say about how they feel or the perception of safety after more law enforcement is patrolling the streets?
Well, that convenience store owner, I think she gave me one of the best responses on this, which is, at this point, everybody's guessing. We're still not sure because in a lot of areas, there hasn't yet been much of an additional presence from the National Guard or law enforcement, for example, on Georgia Avenue, which is one place I visited. On the other hand, if you look at wards 7 and 8, that's where at least half, according to the Trump administration, of these surging arrests have been concentrated. And those are very high crime areas. I think that you also have to keep in mind the context of ICE operating alongside law enforcement, arrests of illegal immigrants. And so that is also generating a somewhat divided response. You saw a protest in Columbia Heights near the metro station, residents and I would probably speculate activists coming in and voicing opposition there. But as I said, there are certainly residents, certainly business owners and employees who are just generally concerned about the scope of crime that they see every day. And you can also go on social media and see that at least some residents are reacting positively to what appears to be a less violent environment. Now murder-free DC is for, I believe, a week.
Okay, Nathan, just one final thing. There have been hundreds of arrests since the takeover. What does that indicate? And why now? Because crime, homelessness, other things, these are long-standing issues. So why is this happening currently?
Well, I think the answer boils down to one word, and that is Trump. The president has this power under the Home Rule Act to take control of the police, and he is flexing his power with the National Guard, getting cooperation also from governors in other states who are sending their National Guard to assist in this effort. I think you look at the capital of the United States, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of just how bad the homicide situation is relative to 2023. Big picture, though, DC is, by national standards, by international standards, a pretty unsafe place, especially if it's the seat of government. And I think we're seeing from the Trump administration on this issue, as in so many others, a desire to kind of upend the accepted way things are. And we are going to have to just see over the next few weeks and months if there's enough of a difference, and a difference that people perceive as positive, for this to really resonate as a massive change in the image and the atmosphere, the vibes of the nation's capital, this showpiece for the American Republic.
Well, Nathan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don.
Coming up, the European Commission outlined details of the new trade deal with Washington, which removes tariffs on U.S. goods while capping tariffs on key European exports. Don't go away for that.
So at the age of 5, I was sexually molested. I had my first child at the age of 15 and became homeless at the age of 16. The scariest part about not having a place to live was having a child and not having a place to live, and not knowing where our meal was going to come from and where we're going to sleep. To be homeless as a teen, I didn't ask for that.
No young person should ever have to worry about having a safe place to sleep at night, or a warm meal to eat, or whether anyone cares about them. 1 in 10 young adults will experience a form of homelessness this year, and that's unacceptable. But the good news is there is an organization making a big difference, Covenant House.
Call or go online now. For a gift of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant House every night.
For over 50 years, Covenant House has been helping youth in crisis.
It was pretty tough, but Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today.
Call or go online right now to safeplacetosleep.org with your gift of just $19 a month. With your monthly donation, you'll receive this soft, comforting blanket as a reminder of the warmth and safety your gift will provide a young person tonight.
I have no words to express how Covenant House changed my life. They gave me the love that I needed. They just really genuinely just wanted to help me succeed, and I'm succeeding.
Your $19 monthly gift is urgently needed to reach other young people who are facing unimaginable situations. Call or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
Your support makes the work of Covenant House possible. Thank you for caring.
£6 prescription glasses from Select Specs are always great value. There are no offer codes or first-time customers only. Anyone can buy them, anytime. And you can upgrade to Select Specs Express for next-day delivery. And with deferred payments, you can spread the cost.
See now, pay later with Select Specs £6 specs. Next day delivery and deferred payment options available at selectspecs.com/£6.
Save big at Mathis Home with Labor Day deals in every department. Check out their new arrivals and save big on the latest living rooms. This reclining sofa is a great example of their unbeatable prices. It's just $449. Where else can you find a sofa with 2 built-in recliners for just $449? With their incredible selection, you're sure to find the sofa just right for you. Plus, they're all in stock, so you can take it home today or get it delivered absolutely free. Hurry in, these deals won't last long. Now through Labor Day, only at Mathis Home.
In July, President Trump called the trade deal with the EU the biggest deal ever. Today, the U.S. and the EU confirmed the agreement on tariffs and released more details about it. NTD international correspondent David Revez reports from Paris.
1 month ago, President Trump and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen agreed on a new trade deal. The joint agreement was detailed today by the European Commission. It states that the EU intends to eliminate tariffs on all U.S. industrial goods and provide preferential market access for a wide range of U.S. seafood and agricultural products. Starting September 1, the U.S. will impose a 15% tariff on most European goods, including semiconductors and lumber. In exchange, the EU will scrap tariffs on all U.S. industrial goods, including farm products like fruit, pork, bison, and nuts. The U.S. will only cut tariffs on European cars from 27.5% to 15% once Europe's tariff removal is written into law, according to the deal. Last month, Trump had said that drugs and chips were excluded from the new U.S.-EU trade deal, leaving them open to tariff as high as 250% and 100%. But new details released today show both will now be capped at 15%, matching other sectors. The agreement also highlights that since the EU and US share one of the largest business relationships in the world, mutual investments would be highly profitable for both parties. As part of this effort, the European Union intends to procure US liquefied natural gas, oil and nuclear energy products, with an expected offtake valued at $750 billion through 2028. European companies are also expected to invest an additional $600 billion in strategic sectors in the United States through 2028. In addition, the EU plans to purchase at least $40 billion worth of US AI chips for its computing centers. In a joint statement, the US and EU said this was a first step in a process that could be expanded as the relationship develops. On a final note, this deal can be viewed as an important step in a new US trade policy that is less dependent on China. The deal layers the World Trade Organization, which President Trump has long said has been too one-sided with China with its policies and arbitrage. These remarks echoes the word of the EU Commission President in June when she addressed the possibility of creating a new WTO based on freer trade rules. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Ukraine keeps pushing for a meeting with Russia, calling on the U.S. to possibly ramp up pressure on Moscow. Vice President J.D. Vance gives his take on the meeting. Preparation and possibly security guarantees for Ukraine. NTD international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more on the Ukraine peace efforts.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky keeps pushing for a meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. A Kremlin spokesperson on Thursday said that it only makes sense for the presidents to meet once they agree on the details of a possible peace deal. Vice President J.D. Vance tells Fox News that he doesn't agree with that notion.
We shouldn't say that they can't sit down until you've figured out every little detail. Sometimes them sitting down is what facilitates figuring out those details.
Zelensky says he's ready for a meeting, adding that if the Russians are not ready, we would like to see a strong reaction from the United States. Vance lays out the two main issues in which Russia and Ukraine still have disagreements on.
Ukraine wants to know that it's not going to get invaded again by Russia. It wants to know that it's got territorial integrity long into the future. The Russians want certain pieces of territory, most of which they've occupied, but some of which they haven't.
The reason for Ukraine not wanting to be invaded again is why Western allies are currently working on security guarantees. That's, for example, by sending in peacekeepers from Western countries to make sure Russia doesn't invade again. Zelensky on Wednesday said he hopes that there will be more concrete plans for such guarantees within 7 to 10 days. And meanwhile, Russia also wants its own security guarantees. Moscow long seeks that Ukraine be demilitarized and stop trying to be allied with the West, saying Ukraine would remain neutral, non-nuclear and non-aligned. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The FBI is warning that Russian hackers have breached computer systems at power grids, water treatment facilities, and other critical infrastructure in the U.S. The hackers, tied to Russia's security service, allegedly stole configuration files from thousands of networking devices over the past year. Investigators say the hackers didn't just steal data, they snooped around to learn how the software running power plants and water facilities works. The Bureau says the hackers, dubbed Berserk, Bear, and Dragonfly, exploited outdated tech, no longer receiving security updates. The FBI says energy, water, waste, telecom, aviation, and government sectors are especially vulnerable as they struggle with outdated systems. Hurricane Erin is staying far offshore, but the sprawling storm is delivering dangerous conditions at beaches along much of the East Coast. Officials have had to make dozens of rescues this week. Here's more.
Hurricane Erin might not be making landfall, but its impact is clear as it makes its way north off the East Coast. Much of the East Coast is under the threat of deadly rip currents and dangerous surf conditions. Officials warning people to stay out of the water.
We've tried our best. We try to get the messaging out. We've been very proactive, and it has helped. Like I said, the numbers, I think, show that. But again, it's still going to be very dangerous for these next couple of days, I'd imagine into Friday.
North Carolina is under a state of emergency, and evacuations have been ordered in parts of the Outer Banks, where the storm surge has pushed water past the beaches and into the streets, seen here cutting off part of Highway 12. The potential for towering waves and life-threatening rip currents could last for days in some areas. In Wrightsville Beach, the no-swim advisory runs through Friday.
After that, when you come out to the beach, always make note of the flag color. If we are flying red flags, stay out of the ocean. You are putting yourself in danger. And then when you are in distress, you need help, now you're putting one of my guards in danger coming out there to make that rescue.
Hurricane Helene victims are getting an additional $96 million in federal funding. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said this is to support communities in North Carolina devastated by Helene last year. The funds are being distributed through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This will cover more than 200 state and local recovery projects. This includes debris removal, road repair, infrastructure restoration, and more. Under President Trump's second term, FEMA has provided more than $322 million in reimbursements to support recovery efforts in the state. Coming up, the Democratic Party is facing a voter registration crisis, according to a new report. What does this mean going into the midterms? Experts weigh in when we come back.
Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. How did I get here?
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
We said we'd never give in to a meltdown.
Okay.
And we'd never babysit with a screen. We said we'd never let the toys take over.
Mariella!
Never leave the house looking, well, and never let them out of our sight. Skylar, come here. Cars get hot fast, and kids can be at risk. Before you leave the car, always stop, look, lock.
A new report says the Democratic Party is having a voter registration problem. Joining us now to discuss this is Hadley Manning, Executive Vice President of Fellow at the Steamboat Institute, and we have George Carrillo, former Democratic candidate for Governor of Oregon and former Director of Social Determinants of Health for Oregon. Good to have you both on again. Hadley, I'll start with you today. What do you make of this New York Times report titled "The Democratic Party Faces a Voter Registration Crisis"?
Well, a few points. First of all, and I said this yesterday, but we're living in a time of very low public trust in all types of institutions. And this affects our major political parties, our media, our government, our academic institutions, even our social institutions like churches. People simply want to be unaffiliated. They want to be independent. They like to follow individuals, influencers online, but to identify with a party is simply less popular than it used to be. However, I think there's something particular affecting the Democratic Party today, and that is that it's become a small tent party. The right has become a big tent party where you have MAGA, but you also have the evangelical right, you have capitalists on the right, you have libertarians on the right, you have hawks on the right, you have doves on the right. Now, this makes for very interesting internal battles on the right, but it's a party that's even accepted a lot more populist ideas. Meanwhile, on the left, if people sense that there's some kind of ideological purity test to be a part of the Democratic Party, they're more likely to say, that's not for me, I don't have a seat at that table. So there's a few factors going on, but I think Democrats can reverse this. It's not the end of the line for Democrats, but certainly a short-term problem as we come up on midterm elections in 2026.
So, George, how are you looking at this? What is your view with what's happening with Democratic voter registration numbers across the country?
So we're seeing that we lost trust with the American people years ago. I would say back to 2020, 2021. We really embraced diversity, equity, inclusion, but yet we didn't practice those things in real life. When you didn't agree with the Democratic Party's stance on things, then you were excommunicated from the party. There was this cancel culture movement that happened, and it didn't benefit the Democratic Party. And then, you have MAGA that comes in, creates, I think, a large divide within the country. But I think that most people saw that they didn't necessarily fit in with the Democratic Party. And so you're seeing this uptick, what I believe right now, in independent voters, not affiliating themselves with Republicans nor with Democrats. And so I think that holds a lot of power right now in our political system, because people are saying, we don't necessarily agree with the right or with the left. You're going to have to work for our vote. And right now, that's what the Democratic Party really needs to get back to is what are we talking about at our kitchen tables? What's the American people talking about that's really impacting their everyday lives?
So, Madeleine, what do you think about what's being said just now?
Sure, it makes me think of what it was like to be on the right politically during the Obama years. You know, in 2008 and 2012, after those elections when President Obama won and won big, specifically with certain demographics like young voters, voters of color, and single women voters, the autopsy on the common theme was, oh, demographics are destiny and we are doomed, you know, that we're going to see a lot of older Americans who identify with more conservative, right-leaning politics on the Republican side, kind of dying off or exiting the scene, and meanwhile the future belongs to Democrats. But that common wisdom at the time has turned out to be wrong. You know, things can change, and of course right now what we're witnessing is a big political realignment. And so MAGA is not your traditional conservatism. It is more broad and I would say more moderate in some ways, and also harder to predict. But that makes it a challenge to be the political opposition, where I see on the left a bifurcation between the more progressive left wing of the party and center-left Americans who maybe traditionally have identified as Democrats, but they aren't sure if the future of the party is one where they have a seat at the table.
Georgia, I want to continue on a point that Hadley mentioned briefly, and that is demographics. According to the report, Democrats are losing ground among men, young voters, Latinos. I'm curious as to what you think about that.
So I think you're absolutely right. When it comes to younger males, especially Black and Latino, I believe the Democratic Party just took it for granted that we were just going to always vote with the left, and that has shifted. As you know, our culture is very complicated. There's a variety of different layers within our culture, and I believe that the Republican Party was able to pull more on those heartstrings and really understand the voter. And that's the reason why you saw a major shift in this last election, where more Latinos, more Hispanics in America today voted for Donald Trump than for Kamala Harris. And so they're really struggling with that. They're trying to find their voice. Right now, what's a little bit frustrating is that for a minority group, as large as we are, we're the biggest minority group in the United States. We account for over 30 million people. We have a crisis here in the country when we come to stabilizing our workforce and also with mass deportations, but yet we don't hear Democrats coming up with a solution. We've actually proposed a solution that we believe is bipartisan that would really help the U.S. economy and also bring peace to our community. And yet we have been waiting for Democrats to jump on board to really sort of take the mantle. But if the response is always going to be, well, we're just not in power right now, well, then you're going to probably lose the next, midterm election. We really need Democrats to stand strong and posture strong and come up with solutions. And this blaming back and forth doesn't help. And they need to realize that for minority groups, if you are going to want to represent us, then you have to work for our vote. You could just no longer take for granted that we're just going to vote on the left side.
So, Hadley, going off of that, how much of this issue do you think is about the Democratic Party's core brand?
Oh, a lot of it is. For many years, I thought that this was the problem on the Republican side. I thought we have great ideas, but the branding isn't getting across to people. We have a toxic brand. People don't want to be associated with us. And so obviously that's a big piece of this. And unfortunately for Democrats, there has been a vibe shift, culturally speaking, where it's become more acceptable, particularly for younger people and particularly for young men, to identify as Republican, to identify as a part of MAGA, or to identify as simply being on the political right. It used to be just 15, 20 short years ago that if you were a young person and you identified as conservative or Republican, that was an extremely uncool thing to do. I should know. I had that experience. But now we're seeing a big shift, especially among young people, especially among young men. It's simply become cooler to identify in certain subcultures as a Republican. The online element of this is not to be ignored or dismissed, that people are finding a lot more of their social interaction online and not in real life, not in person. And online, you can find more polarized communities, but you can also find a place to fit in if you are on the right and if you don't necessarily have that culture around you in a big city that might be dark blue, or in a university setting that might be more liberal leaning, you can find and connect with and network and even advocate online, which wasn't as much of an option, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Okay, George, can I get your response to what Hadley said? And as well, you mentioned the midterms earlier. What does the situation mean for the Democratic Party or Republicans going into midterms?
Well, I think right now for the midterm election, we really need to put a valiant effort with getting our messaging back on. We are the party that believes in the working class. We believe in that people that are making more money should be paying a higher tax bracket, so that way we can have some sort of equity amongst all of our programs. And I think that this is where Republicans are going to bury themselves when it comes to the taxation plan, the big beautiful bill, the millions of people that are going to lose Medicaid, the families that are going to be struggling because of reduced SNAP benefits. These are all things that the Republicans are going to have to own. And of course, a lot of these things aren't going to happen till till after the midterms. But the next presidential race will be interesting. But our tactic cannot be that we're going to let Republicans just self-implode and then the only other option is to vote for a Democrat. That can't be our strategy. We have to have the right messaging. We have to start standing strong. We have to start standing united. We have to understand that as a party what is our priorities? I always tell people, I've been a lifelong Democrat. That's never changed. But the priorities of the party have drastically moved further and further left. My principles haven't changed, but it just seems that you're either all in and you're accepted as a Democrat, or you're not, and then all of a sudden you're on the outs. And that behavior needs to change, and the Democratic Party needs to understand that within our own party, we have a diversity of thought, we have a diversity in belief, and we have a diversity in understanding of how to implement the proper strategies. And we need to start embracing that. And we need to start sending that message out. Now is the time. If we can't do it now, then we're not going to regain Congress. We're not going to regain the House or the Senate. And we're going to allow Republicans to keep control of this government, which nobody wants at this time.
Okay, Hadley, two things. One is that George mentioned, and you also alluded to this point earlier, that for the Democratic Party, you're either all in or you're out. Paraphrasing a little bit here. Can you react to that a little bit more? And as well, how much of an indicator is voter registration data for election outcomes?
Sure. So I'll take your first question first. But when it comes to the sort of ideological litmus test or purity test that I mentioned earlier, I agree that's something that Democrats totally have to eschew. And if I were giving advice, I would actually say go back to the Obama playbook. And the Obama playbook, in my opinion, is one where, regardless of what your position on specific policies might be, your outward-facing messaging, your talking points, your branding is very welcoming, is very centrist, is very moderate in terms of, getting as many people involved as possible and advocating for hope and change. That was a key phrase from the Obama campaign. So instead of that model, unfortunately, today, Democrats, it seems, have gotten into a different type of focus, which is to say, either you're with us or you're against us. And that's not a winning strategy. And to speak to voter registration rolls and how they affect election outcomes, first of all, some states require people to sign up with a party and some states don't. And so voter registration data can be a little bit confusing because of that specific point. For example, nationwide, there are more registered Democrats than there are registered Republicans. But then you have states like Texas that don't require people to sign up with either party. And so the voter registration data we have to take with a grain of salt. It doesn't tell us everything about where the parties stand nationally. It tells us some things. And I think a big decrease on the Democratic side should be signaling alarm bells for Democrats. But ultimately, in every election, we're all going to be very concerned with how independent and unaffiliated voters, so-called swing voters, vote. And they typically hold the keys to the car. They typically hold the future, the destiny of however these elections are going to shake out. But Democrats are going to be very competitive in the midterms, especially because the out party typically is during a time where the White House is controlled by their opposition.
Okay, George, final thoughts here.
So my final thoughts is, this race is, we're in full swing now. We have a limited amount of time to be able to determine who our top candidates are going to be in the primary and then heading into the general election of next year. It really is time to really look at this data and say, okay, what does the party believe in, which is the majority of Americans? Where do we need to really start focusing, and how do we look at this messaging that's being brought forward by the Republican Party, and how do we counter that? How do we not just sit idly saying we're just going to let Republicans implode, or that we're just not in power right now? We really need to get to the hearts of what we are talking about every single day at our dinner tables, which is we are all worried about the U.S. economy. We are all worried about our pocketbooks. We are all worried about our healthcare and our education for our children. We need to get back to those roots, and we need to say that we can do it better, and that we are going to be inclusive, and we're going to invite everybody into the party and welcome that journey of really turning this dictator style approach of government right now into one that really represents democracy.
Okay, well, very thoughtful, engaging conversation. Thank you both for the discussion today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Coming up, Microsoft says it has scaled back some Chinese companies' access to its early warning systems for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Stay tuned for that and more when we come back.
Shenyun Creations, the streaming platform from Shenyun, featuring world-class dance, past programs, and all original music. Masterclasses, behind the scenes, comedy, and more. Explore shenyuncreations.com.
I go by Jackie. I'm 44 years old. I had 3 kids at the time and single mother. I was working 60 hours a week, still couldn't pay the bills. I'd skip meals so that they could eat. It's been hard because one thing falls into place, 10 things fall out of place. You know, I just can't do this alone and make it work.
1 in 5 kids face hunger in America, and food costs are rising. But everyone needs nourishing food to thrive, and they can when we work together so our neighbors can feed their families. Call or go online right now to join Feeding America with your gift of just $19 a month, only 63 cents a day. Together, thanks to a nationwide network of food banks, dedicated volunteers, and the monthly support of people like you, we can fill plates with nutritious food for kids facing hunger this summer.
One day my mother came over to my house and said, "There's a meeting at the pantry." I said, "Okay," and I went. There were some ladies in there. They were from the food bank. They asked several questions. Some of those were about me and my story, but it helped me to open up a little bit.
We're getting closer to the day when no one in America faces hunger, but we can't do it without you. Call or go online now. Visit helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, just 63 cents a day. 98% of donations go directly to help millions of children facing hunger from coast to coast and in your own community. And when you give by credit card, we'll send you this exclusive canvas grocery bag to show you are a part of a movement of supporters working together to help end hunger.
I have people that I can trust. I have hope.
Please call now or make your monthly donation at helpfeedingamerica.org. Working together, we can end hunger in America.
For decades, I've taught you everything I know. How to safely build a fire, and how to control the flames. But I can only teach wildfire prevention. Only you can prevent wildfires.
Microsoft says it has scaled back some Chinese companies' access to its early warning system for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It comes after last month's sweeping hacking attempts against Microsoft SharePoint servers. Microsoft and others have blamed Beijing for at least some of the hacking attempts. That raised suspicions among several cybersecurity experts that there was a leak in the Microsoft Active Protections program. Microsoft uses the program to help security vendors worldwide learn about cyber threats before the general public so they can better defend against hackers. Beijing has denied involvement in any SharePoint hacking. China's economy is struggling across the board, and young people are bearing the brunt. They're facing one of the toughest job markets in nearly a year. On Tuesday, China's National Statistics Bureau reported that the youth unemployment rate in July climbed to nearly 18%. That's the highest level since last August, meaning that currently 1 in 5 adults in China are looking for work or are actually unemployed. But a U.S. business professor is questioning the accuracy of these numbers. Here's more.
First of all, you can never trust the Chinese Communist government's number, the statistics. They have been known for systematically massaging or even fabricating their stats.
The youth unemployment data targets people aged 16 to 24 who are actively seeking a job. This summer, over 12 million fresh graduates are entering China's already shaken labor market. But the reality may be even tougher.
Actually, in fact, there are some Chinese scholars. There's one notable scholar from Peking University. She actually, I think it's sometime last year, did her own calculation and came up with a youth unemployment number of 47%. I think that's much closer to reality. So this 17% is just far from reality.
Zhang Dandan is a Chinese labor economist and assistant professor at Peking University. Her estimates are far higher than official numbers. Last March, she put China's youth jobless rate at about 47%, while official data reported around 20%. Critics and Chinese economists say China's method of calculating unemployment hardly reflects the full picture, since it excludes a large portion of the population. Rural populations are largely excluded from the data, and the youth unemployment numbers only cover urban areas. The Chinese regime also has significant influence over official data. In 2023, authorities halted releasing data from July to November. And there's another factor making job hunting in China even more challenging.
And I think the government's major drive for pushing AI is for its application in military use, in military, in weapons, in the system, so they can catch up with the U.S. in military technology. On the other side, on the other hand, to say AI, a wider application by Chinese companies of using AI is definitely going to hurt the job market even further. So that's kind of making it more complicated.
Nearly 4 million people registered for master's entrance exams this year, hoping to land jobs with better pay and benefits. But will reality meet their expectations? As China focuses on the AI race with the U.S., many companies have started using AI to replace some skilled positions in fields like translation, banking, and sales. Analysts say this trend could deal a major blow to China's heavily educated labor force.
Coming up, President Trump responds on Truth Social to a new legal victory, a court in New York tossing out his $454 million penalty in a business fraud case. That and more after the break.
Hi, I'm Ty Pennington, here for Choice Home Warranty. They protect my home from expensive repairs, and they can do the same for you. No matter if it's your refrigerator, plumbing, or more than 20 other home systems and appliances, Choice Home Warranty has saved millions of homeowners a whole lot of money. For a low monthly fee, you get their nationwide network of trusted local technicians with plans that cover repairs and replacements done quickly and the right way. No more headaches searching for technicians. No more budget-breaking chaos. Just a peace of mind of having Choice Home Warranty at your service. Call Choice Home Warranty now and save big with their special offer of your first month free and free limited roof coverage. Call now.
Call Choice Home Warranty for your free personalized quote and to get your first month free. Call in the next 5 minutes, and as our special offer, you'll receive free limited roof coverage. Call now to lock in your rate and save big. Call 800-522-0122, 800-522-0122.
What if you could whiten your teeth by simply brushing your teeth? Now you can with Smile Actives, the teeth whitening breakthrough that safely gets your teeth white and keeps them white every day, just by brushing your teeth.
I never thought that whitening my teeth could be so easy. I just put the gel on the brush, the toothpaste on it, brush, and I can see my white teeth.
Simply add Smile Actives to any toothpaste and our patented PolyClean technology activates into a powerful microfoam that penetrates into the enamel surface to safely lift and remove stains.
You need a simple way to